Janine Bowen is a Seneca Faith Keeper of the Beaver Clan. She's a director of the Allegheny Language Department at the Seneca Nation in New York. She earned her doctorate of Education, Master of Education from Harvard Graduate School of Education, and her master's in from Public Policy and from Harvard Kennedy School of Government. Candy Hurtado. Candy is the Executive Director of the Kuyayky Foundation, an NGO fostering the Andean Quechua. She's a McKnight and Presidential Fellow pursuing her PhD in Andean Studies at Florida Atlantic University. And then Bena Singar is a Fulbright Scholar in Residence here at FIU. She arrived in August. She's a specialist in South Asian tribal.
And I thought what was interesting about our panel, what I loved about it, was that we have women of color who are able to frame this issue from the global south. So I think that's important when we usually don't have these kinds of discussions in that sense. I also mentioned that it's for the indigenous people in the Americas, in Latin America specifically, it's something that we're working through. Like the great Catherine mentioned, it's something, the classification of indigenous that is so clear here in the United States is something that we definitely don't have a clear answer for in the rest of the Americas. So I'm going to read a little bit when you look at this. This is actually photographs. That's my grandmother from all the way on the left from my father's side. These are my great-grandmothers and my grandmother on my mother's side. These are the children of the orchestra we have now in the same area in Jauja. And then a picture of a chuto, a dancer in the Tunandada today in the Montero Valley. So issues regarding the authenticity of Andean cultural expressions have plagued both recent and early Peruvian ethnomusicology. Early attempts by European ethnomusicologists, such as at their courts, were motivated by a mission to safeguard what they considered the remnants of Inca music through ethnographic recordings and musical transcriptions. Similar concerns led the work of local self-taught ethnomusicologists such as Daniel Lomia Robles and Teodoro Valcárcel, who not only sought to record and transcribe this music into Western musical notation, but also build upon this musical legacy by arranging it and thus endowing it with harmonious mestizaje. It is this act of creativity that has most recently been policed by academics who are quick to label their work as indigenista or revivalist, contesting its supposed indigenous authenticity, based on their own Western musical conceptualizations of what Andean music should and should not be. Thus, the memory of a musical Inca past has transformed itself into a cultural policing from unlikely sources that most often come from the outside, creating a long-lasting discourse of authenticity that in many ways negates culture's fundamental ability to adapt and change while remaining at its core unique in its identity. The cultural policing by scholars and traditionalists, most often from the hegemonic space of the cities and from the West, lacks a true understanding and respect for the historical heterogeneity of the Andes and for the agency of indigenous cultural actors. Such is the case that even when approaching modern indigeneity, ethnomusicologists continue to ascribe to certain conceptualizations of what is authentic in the Andes and what is not. And I'm mentioning ethnomusicology because that's the area I treat with music and dance performance, but it happened in the area of literature as well. The work that came out of the late 1800s and in the 19th century was considered, if it dealt with any kind of indigenous issue, it was dismissed as indigenista. So it became very clear that it was a tough place to be in if you came from these indigenous spaces or spaces outside the cities. Anything that you would try to create would be not authentic, right? So it kind of puts people in a really tough place. So here is Peru. For those of, I don't know why it pops so much, it's very annoying.
Stay back.
It's a multi-directional.
Stay back.
I sing, so this is Okay, so is this good here?
Yeah.
Okay, good, perfect, sorry, I can't tell, there's no monitors for me to gauge that. So this is a map of Peru. If you see, I come from this region here, which is Jauja, red, and it's situated within the Mandaro Valley. It was known as Hatun Sausa, so it was a very important center, religious center, commercial center, for the Andes before the Incas and during the Incas as well. So what we see, and what I mentioned briefly, was that we had this constant period of migration. We see it in a lot of the toponyms that we still have in our area today, where we have the passing of the Wari Empire from the south within the language. We still, there's very small parts of Jauja that speak Xauxa, which is a proto-Quechua. So it's one of the stages of the Quechua language still widely spoken throughout the Andes today. But our language again denotes also this migration, right? Migrations were political in nature during Inca times that we're finding out were not only economic but religious. We are situated at an important center of deities, Andean deities, so gods. And so a lot of the pilgrimages that took place were official pilgrimages that took place from the coast, from the Pachacamac, another important religious center, into our area. And a lot of these people stayed. Sometimes they were, quote unquote, forced to stay by the Inca rule. And so we believe that we had a lot of priests, like a priestly order and a military order that came from the coast that came to stay within our region. And that is not only told by, thankfully, the work of some archaeologists from the United States and now also from Peru, where I grabbed a couple of the maps from, but it's a story that is told through our dances as well. And I think a lot of the times when we think about indigenous people, and because of all, like she called the legal implications, right? So we have these issues with being called indigenous or indígena or indio. It's very, we don't like it, at least on a personal note. But then we don't have access to things such as la ley de consulta previa, right? That allow us to keep land and have certain rights over other groups. And it's something that has also, we've been playing politics with in Peru, at least, because of this lack of attachment to the word indigenous. They went ahead and they called us farmers all of a sudden in the 70s. And so it seemed like something nice because we became people, and that we were always people. But at the same time, we lost a lot of these rights that we had, especially in the Andes. A lot of our indigenous communities remain Jauja, which is also not only a city, but a region, has a lot of indigenous Amazonian communities within it, like the Ashaninkas, so forth. But that are still, again, fighting for their own rights as well. Like here you see one of the toponyms that I was mentioning, Huaripampa, the place where the Huaris settled into that. And of course, Yauyos, which is where the dance that I'm going to show you comes from. Yauyos, it's also a province in Lima, which is on the coast, out those mountains, a little bit further away. And so the Yauyos came, and they, we believe they were mi'kmaq of the Inca, which are groups of people that the Inca moved from one area to the other as part of their whole project. And so they stayed within our territory and created their own community and practiced their own dances and their own music. So here I have some images from, this is a dance that we practice today in the Hurtado Valley. It's very interesting because we claim our Sausa, our indigenous identity, but at the same time we never call it indigenous. And I wanted to find there was a poster by our Ministry of Culture within our region of Junín, and they were celebrating Indigenous Peoples Day, and they had two Amazonian communities, leaders dressed in their Amazonian garb, and they had the chuto, which is this figure right here, central to the Tunandala. And the comment right below it basically talked about what we are hopefully discussing today. They said, he's not indigenous, why are they putting him there, you know? And the chuto, interestingly enough, now that we are learning Quechua, because again, we've been colonized so many times, the chuto itself means the persons that come from the highlands, basically what we would term the indigenous, the Indians, right? And so it's interesting that we have kind of this very strong identity identified with the chuto, but we at the same time deny that indigeneity. But meanwhile, we are highly identified and claiming our agency through the Tunandala and Sausa, being Sausa. So the history of migration continues a lot. I've been doing a lot of research of this dance drama, the Tunandala, and so a lot of the practitioners happen to be migrants from mining towns that go through Jauja for different reasons in life. And so a lot of these people that claim a strong Jauja, Sausa identity actually come from other places in Peru, far away places, sometimes hours, 8-10 hours away, and they still, feel very strongly about not only the Tunandala, but about this Sausa identity. So we do with the foundation, like I said, it's a difficult task, but what we're working is with empowering children. So we believe that children need to know who they are in order to feel that they can contribute to the world. We also believe that indigenous is not something that should be cast to the museums, and something that should be classified very rigidly, but that we are creative people, that we continue to create. We continue to create dances such as the Tunandala. We continue to add characters onto the Tunandala. We continue to change the regalia worn in those dances. And so we want to teach that to these children. We want to give them the tools, the history behind each of the songs that they learn, but we also want to tell them that it's okay, that they have the power to create more, and that they come from all these great groups of people before them, and that they can do so.
Couple just before this, just 15 minutes before this, so I actually ran with my two friends, Feroz and Miguel, to be here at time at 6 p.m. So I couldn't work on the PPT, but I would like to share a small event which fortunately I took my both of friends yesterday after they had wonderful talk with some of my students in my class. As I'm teaching a course on global indigenous history, global indigenous history. So I'm in US, I have to follow the colonial narratives. So, so I was with them, and after my lecture, I said, let's run. And so we both ran away and we went to Bilbags. And we went to Bilbags because Professor Dennis had told me that, Bina, you have to see Bilbags before you leave Miami, because it was the lighthouse burned down by the Seminoles. So I just, we drove 2 hours, went to Bilbags to see the lighthouse and to see what the epitaph of the Bilbags says. And in the Bilbags epitaph on lighthouse says that this is the monument of greatness. It has been seen various ups and downs. It was run down by the Haitian slaves and also once by the Seminoles in one of their wars. And then it still relived itself, and it has the glory of the British and the Spaniards. That defines. Should I narrate more? It defines that where the marginality of narrative is placed, where the histories of the great Seminoles of Florida or the Southeast is there in the lighthouse. I won't say more. So these are the challenges of the narratives which actually define who is indigenous. Because all of us are part of the histories of this world. We had been contributing in one or the other way, either as a migrant, either as a nomad, either as a settler, or either as a localized community of one particular territory. Maybe we may not have moved for the ages together, but still we have our own histories and identities. Could we confine them into the historicity or ahistoricity of a region, of being an indigenous or not? I have a simple question to so-called European narratives itself. That are they not indigenous to some part of the world? They have to question their own identity. And fortunately, so many of us who have been displaced from our own European lands, because my own thing also says that somewhere deep down I had some European legacy. I don't want to go into ancestry.com because I believe my parents where I come from. I don't want to go into dig out of all those things. So, but there are some challenges for them as well. And now, fortunately, Europeans themselves are digging their own past and ancestry and being where they exactly locate themselves. How much they are people of land and how much they are the nomads. And there are several questions they are asking to their own identities. Some of the dominant who are somewhere in the world, they don't want to, because there are many. Because narrating our own past and our own self, I won't call it indigeneity again and again, narrating our own self as a community identity, as an individual identity, requires a lot of courage, because it requires us to disown a lot of power structures and also to have a very good strength to know that we own also a lot of power structures. I hope you are getting it. Because sometimes when we interrogate our identities, we get to know that we were exploiters and we were power owners. And also sometimes when we interrogate ourselves, we also get to know that yes, we were not the power owners and we were not the exploiters, but we were the exploited ones. So one or the other way, we all have to interrogate our histories. And fortunately, India had been fortunate to question its indigeneity, or I will do away with the whole notion of indigeneity right now. We were actually very fortunate to have the whole decolonizing narrative right when Britishers were ruling us. So when Macaulay was trying to say that these Indians don't have any histories, and one book of mathematics or rational, like J.S. Mill's one book of rationalism is enough to do away with all the literature of Indians, we had really good historians like R.C. Majumdar, D.C. Sarkar, H.D. Sankalia to tell them that no, you cannot do that. We have our language to at least tell you in the textual forms that we had been here for generations. We had our own histories of domination, exploitation and re-exploitation, re-emergence. So history is more important to tell us that what exactly the identities are. And identities are not static, they keep on evolving. And Indian, for South Asia, I'm talking about in terms of South Asia, but we are fortunate because Firoz is a good friend and we became friends just 5 months ago. But we have so much histories with Central Asia, which we cannot disown, we cannot deny, and we very happily accept. So no matter I belong to a small village, I had been grown in different parts of India, and like now I'm in US, and I have lived several spaces in this world, but I do belong to a small village which had similar cultural practices to what is done in Tajikistan. So there have been histories of connections, and we cannot keep on let the isolationist historiography or isolationist anthropological narratives to dominate that. And we had been doing away with, and we, fortunately, South Asian narratives doesn't conform to it. So even though genetic debate and bloodline had been imposed, we don't agree to it. And we rather play with it. So that you will find in the politics of South Asia, Central Asia, even West Asia, because there is no isolationist bloodlines in the entire rather Eurasian African areas. So even though somebody is matrilineal or patrilineal, it doesn't matter. We had been I'm married to, I'm not married. My father is married to a woman, my mother is from Chandel clan, and who at some particular time was matrilineal, and my father is a singer, which is a predominantly patrilineal clan. And my father keeps on telling me, you have to marry a Rajput because otherwise we will lose your identity as a Rajput. That's a different issue. But the Chandel and the Sengar are the two different warrior clans who have their own histories of integrating with various different ethnic groups of different parts of Central Asia, and South Asia, and also from Himalayan and the southern parts of the territories. Although colonial narratives tried to narrate a story of who is Rajputs, but fortunately we have our own narratives which said that these are the Rajput communities who had been consistently intermingling ethnically and with bloodlines. They married Muslims, they married so-called Hindus of different areas. They married different tribal clans also, so-called tribal clans, because we don't call them tribals in our narratives, in our actual historical narratives. So these had been there, and irrespective of me being born as a Chandel or a singer, I am from that particular region. So this is one kind of narrative where we had been doing away with the idea of anthropological dominant discourses. So colonial narrative is something which has been very critically looked into, very critically criticized and rewritten, or have been several ways being criticized as well. So we look into more into the historical context, the identities. Decolonial, what will be the terminology? So the biggest question which came in the UN actually, when fortunately China and India, we both like vanguards, not vanguards, we are the biggest population groups of Asia, so we both decided not to conform or not to accept the terminology indigenous at all. So both in China and India, this is not the terminology of usage. We give identity to the community. So if a community wants to be identified as Sengar or Gond or Bhil or subclan of it, they get that identity. They won't get a homogeneous identity of being indigenous, along with the identity components of religion, culture, and region as well. So if they conform to a land, that is also the part of the given identity. So there are certain issues of displacement and contested narratives, who is displaced, displaced, and who should not be displaced. So there are certain political challenges also, because we have these are the international lobbies of, I don't want to call it like, but we can call it if we are in US. So communist lobby has its own benefits of patronizing certain set of homogeneity in being called as something, and also the democratic or so-called capitalist forces have their own agendas. So they both had been working on their own things, but playing with the identity is something which need to be discussed. Unfortunately, I think we will be discussing on 13th of April. But these are certain issues of identities. And identity is something which evolves, and it has not to be seen only through a set frameworks of narratives. It needs to be seen through historicity of its own. And thank you for giving me this platform.
Would you like to take a picture with us? I'm going to send this up in a way where we don't have to. I don't want to be in the picture. Like 2 steps out.
I can put it here.
Or you guys can cover it up, or you can like Dr. Weevil and just take it
We
down.
could have done it with the poster of the panel. Yeah.
Okay. All right, you guys.
No, I'm going to the gardening.
We are like, most wanted. Hunted down. Hunt down.
Hey, give me 1 second.
We're writing the posters right now.
Yeah. Okay. Most fire tips.
Most reward you.
Bounties.